Welcome to History Twists, a new podcast channel. This podcast channel will focus on alternate history. There are some excellent podcasts in this genre. There are hundreds of possibilities, thousands, millions perhaps, of possibilities for topics. It's very tempting to follow the format that has been established, but we will follow some different ideas. After all, who wants to be the second or third dog pulling a dog's sled? All those dogs see is a rear end of the dog in front of them. And, we've seen that, right? On this channel, we're going to do kind of something different too. There'll be 4 different types of formats. Dr. Deneen and I might do some solo presentations. Most of the time, Dr. Deneen and I will present together, and for some, we will have scenes from the alternate future acted out, if we can find people in a timely manner to do that. Some will be done in the particular style that Dr. Deneen favors, and others will be done in my style. A little something for everybody, I hope. For some of these podcasts, we may do a series rather than just one podcast on a theme. One different idea is that we will welcome and encourage listeners to suggest and participate in coming up with history twists and possibly joining in the production of bringing the concept to listeners. Really, that might be exciting to some people, and I hope it is, as we would love to, have people participate and be on and da-da-da-da-da. It just makes it more real to you in some ways. So if it sounds like something you might be interested in, hey, we are more than welcoming your ideas and participation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Weaver. I really want to emphasize we're open to participation, others suggesting ideas. This has been a pet project of mine, a long-term goal for some time, and I'm very excited about it. As many of you know, Dr. Weaver and I have a wonderful other podcast, Things You Don't Know, which we will continue. That's more based in reality. You can find it on YouTube at Things You Don't Know 4275 without any spaces or punctuation. Check it out for factual material, some historic events, and also for entertaining.
One of the founding premises of what I call boots on the ground history is that when people think that something is trivial, it usually means they just don't know enough about the topic. So many times, Dr. Deneen and I have selected a topic that we thought, wow, this would be quick, easy, and less impactful perhaps, but still quick and easy. We get into it and we find a wealth of information and cultural importance. So I have stopped thinking about that because it just never works out for us. It's always a lot of intrigue and stuff, which is really cool. People often take familiar things for granted. And boy, have we discovered the error of that way of thinking.
I would say we've had a graduate level course on the error of that way of thinking. But all kidding aside, I certainly agree. We have 2 examples of that. I think a great example was the podcast we did in the very beginning on soft drinks. Remember, we were looking for a topic, and I foolishly said we'd run out of ideas. And you asked me, well, what do you like most? And in a moment of silliness, I said lime Coke. I didn't think we could get a podcast out of that. And I didn't think if we did, anybody would be interested in it. But we learned a lot, a mountain of totally related information, from how Pepsi helped people in India who had been formerly labeled untouchables, to the creation of white Coke with a red star and pictures of Marx and Lenin for the Soviet commander Marshal Gregory Zhukov in World War II. Who would think in the middle of a global conflict, people are thinking about what to drink? Another example was when our friend Jonathan helped us discover about early police forces in France through his interest in a criminal turned policeman by the name of Vidocq. He had learned about that in a comic book, and this turned into many other really exciting discoveries. You can check both of those examples at Things You Don't Know.
Yeah, just to give you an idea, we will continue to use pictures on this channel. We will likely have to use more fantasized pictures because of the speculative nature of what we are doing. After all, there's no real thing that has already happened that we can show a picture of. So I'm really looking forward to coming up with some wild and crazy stuff to do pictures with that hopefully will bear some relevance to what we're doing. We're also looking into a full text rendering of podcasts for the deaf for this channel and also for Things You Don't Know. But it's been pointed out that that would be of use because we have a lot of people who would like to get some of the goodies that we have to offer. And we're going to try and do something about that.
Certainly is a person with an exceptionality. I've benefited from a lot of assistance in some areas, so I want to share that same assistance with somebody else. But in order to make our fantasy more plausible, making a fantasy plausible, that's kind of funny. We'll begin by presenting our current timeline briefly, the reality we're living in here and now. I could do a whole thing just on that, but that's not what the podcast is about. Then we will present what alternative historians call the point of divergence. We will follow and look at the possible consequences that might happen. For as long as I've studied history, the question of how things could have been as opposed to how they are, could have turned out differently, has intrigued me. While we certainly want to entertain, there's another purpose. History is just not isolated events in a distant past. If we've learned anything from our research for Things You Don't Know, from your work in psychology, my own doctoral dissertation, everything is connected. As we say in our notion of boots on the ground history, history is not just past, but is actually past, present, and future.
Now that sounds like a weird idea.
It
How
is.
can something that happened in the past be present and future?
Well, nothing happens in a vacuum. I think that an event in the past starts a person, society down one path. And if that event didn't happen or happened in a different way, things might have been totally different.
You know, I thought about something else in that regard too. When you say something, if you say, look here, well, after it's out of your mouth, it is in the past.
Absolutely.
So the present and the past elides. And in the same sense, present and future elides. They smush together and they really are one thing because time itself is a human construct. And for the most part, it's kind of theoretical. Yeah, we can measure it pretty accurately, witness the atomic clock, but still, they elide, they smush together. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Dr. Deneen.
No, that's some very vital information, Dr. Lee. Thank you for sharing that with the audience and with me. By saying history is present and future, we are demonstrating our understanding that past events determine present and future events. History is a continuous flow, completely interconnected. There used to be a theory called Annals history, which we've talked about in Things You Don't Know somewhat. It's the history of non-elite peoples, but it also had a a wonderful idea that sounds a bit controversial, but I have to admit I must love it. That history itself has agency, that people certainly make their own decisions, but the collective decisions of a group of people push not only their society, but the larger world in one direction or another. Now, what we're going to look at is possibilities that haven't really been explored in writing. Two examples are an alliance between Norse Viking explorers and the Powhatan Native Americans, which would have totally transformed what's now the southern part of the United States, and a defeat of the communists in the Russian Revolution, which could have resulted in anything from a restoration of the Romanov dynasty to a democracy to some early proto-fascism. There are many possibilities, and it just intrigues the hell out of me to look at that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it is interesting. Some other ideas we have are, what if Pepsi, when they had that large navy, took over a country and made it into a capitalistic state without regulation? Boy, there have been some examples of that, believe it or not. And it could have been very different. Fascinating. It's another room to walk into, folks. It's a room with all kinds of things happening. And yeah, we want to get into some of that. Or another thing, what if Mexico had become part of the USA? Another one, what if the movement, and there was one, a movement to establish a homeland for the disabled in Alaska? What if that had succeeded? Okay. I mean, wow. Let your mind wander on that a little bit.
Talk about all free to live in your own separate sections. But I think that if Pepsi had created a country or taken over a country, there is precedent for that, as Dr. Weaver said. The British East India Company that ran India before it became a formal British colony in the 19th century, or when Newfoundland wasn't part of Canada, it was basically run by a board made up of Standard Oil executives, bishops of the Anglican and Catholic churches, and the representatives of a national bank. Talk about the ultimate company town. Possibilities are endless. There is a temptation to revisit familiar ground, to do easier ones. We're determined to tackle, as we said, something more unusual, either ideas that have been mentioned in very broad forms and filling in details, exploring possibilities, or just something that we create, like Dr. Weaver's suggestion about Mexico joining the United States. There was a possibility of that after the Mexican-American War. But these are topics that haven't been done to death. So we think, minus any kind of illicit drugs, it'll be a mind-expanding trip.
Yeah. If it sounds like we're reifying the notions propounded in the movie The Butterfly Effect, we are. Some truly great writers have explored this concept of alternate history. And although we have great respect for many of those works, we will focus our efforts on exploring historical twists that have not yet been explored.
Yeah, the two biggest, most well trodden and well discussed ideas are a Southern victory in the Civil War and the Nazi victory in World War II. Those are great ideas, but as we've said, they've been covered many times, and we're probably going to avoid redoing them. If you have not read Philip Dick's wonderful novel, The Man in the High Castle, or seen the TV series from a few years ago, you should check them out. As far as the Nazis are concerned, Otto von Basel's The Twilight Men, Gregory Benford, the great scientific scholar, has a brilliant anthology called Hitler Victorious. The best Southern Civil War victory story is Harry Turtledove's Guns of the South, where time travel is involved, and some white supremacists from South Africa travel back and help the Army of Northern Virginia. To satisfy some people's urges and my own sort of morbid curiosity, I do also plan sometimes, we don't want to make this happen too often because it'll distract us from our main work, but to compare and contrast some of the other books and podcasts dealing with some of these topics.
Yeah, they hit it out of the park, so to speak. By the way, if you've not seen the movie, The Butterfly Effect, you ought to check it out. You really should check that out as well because it graphically shows how something considered trivial may, in fact, have world changing effects, like the wings of a butterfly flapping.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's really cool. He does a great job with that. Anyhow,
it's always amazed me how the smallest events can have such a momentous impact on history. Uh, Klaus von Stauffenberg's briefcase is kicked under a table, and as a result, the Valkyrie plot against Hitler fails in 1944. The war goes on for another year, and at least 1 million more people die. General Burgoyne's horse loses a shoe, and that's one factor which causes him to lose the Battle of Saratoga in the American Revolution. Check out our Peggy Arnold podcast on things you don't know for more about that. If you want an interesting revolutionary difference, Robert Sobel's book, For Want of a Nail, mentions another version of the nation's founding, and Richard Dreyfuss and Harry Turtledove did a British victory in the revolution called the Two Georges. To mention two of many examples.
indeed, you know, um, we look forward to entertaining our listeners and bringing to mind the interconnectedness of history. And I hope that you will join us in this fun as we create new worlds from twists in history.
I'm really confident, folks, that you will both enjoy these mental explorations, learn from them, and get a greater understanding of what is happening now. As we've said, if you have other ideas, other twists in history, preferably things that haven't already been done, please comment. Please give us a like and let us know. This has been a wonderful experience, and we've been talking about it for some time, so I'm glad we're finally making it happen. I'm as happy as a kid on Christmas doing all this, particularly with my dear friend, Dr. Beaker. So I look forward to it with a great deal of excitement and enthusiasm, and I think you will too.
All right. Well, hey, we hope you join us. We'll catch you later. Bye for now.
Hello.